it's Rococo here. Today we're going to be talking about colors while I do a colorful look. Little bit of a disclaimer. If you're here for in-depth color theory, you are in the wrong place. Perhaps a little down the line we can do a video about some of the more fancy-dancy elements, but for now it's going to be like color theory presented by LITE. That being said, we're going to talk about the basic color wheel, cool versus warm tones, some basic terminology, and some palette creation tips. So if that's what you're looking for, stick around. Let's start with terminology. Working with pigments, you have 4 starter technical terms: hue, tone, tint, and shade. Hue is your base. It's color on its own. Nothing's been added to it to make it darker or lighter. Tone is adding gray to a hue to change its value or appearance. Tint is adding white to a hue, and shade is when you add black to a hue. In the makeup world, tone and shade are kind of thrown around interchangeably and loosely because of their other definitions. While tone is adding gray, it's also the characteristics of something or the brightness or deepness of a color. Tint, while in pigments is just adding white, also means a type of a color. Because why not? These definitions allow for tint and tone to be used to describe the subtleties of a color and still be the correct term, despite being very clearly outlined in the pigment mixing world. To understand the subtleties of color, we need to understand the basics. Let's talk about a tool for understanding color relationships. Enter color wheel. You can get color wheels in all different kinds of complexity, really, and truly, it can go nuts, but they follow the same basic premise, which is colors relate to each other in a set way. The wheel we're going to look at today is pretty much the most simplified type of color wheel with only 3 layers, but that is plenty for understanding the basic relationships of color. The first layer is the primary colors. Your primary colors are colors that don't have anything mixed to make them. They are red, yellow, and blue. The second layer is going to be called your secondary colors. These are the colors that are a mixture of 2 primary colors. These are orange, green, and purple. The third layer is your tertiary colors. Now this one can be a little bit tricky, but basically tertiary colors are the colors that happen between a primary and a secondary color. These are those weird named colors like chartreuse and mauve. Of course, there's like a billion combinations and even more names, but really, you just need to know that it's not a primary color and it's not a secondary color to get your bearings. So what do you do with the color wheel now that you can kind of read it? Well, you can use it to figure out how to mix a color. You can use it to see its relationships with other colors for neutralizing and matching. And you can use it to get a handle on those subtleties we talked about it in the form of undertones. When you're looking for relationships between colors, the main one I'm going to teach you today is opposites. Your color opposite is what color is a direct line across from your chosen color on the color wheel. This step is crucial for color correction and for basic color scheme creation. In color correction, if you want to make a color that's standing out on your skin return to your skin tone, you need the opposite color on the color wheel. At the beginning of this video, you can see this in action as I neutralize my dark circles under my eyes. I did mix mine on my own, so for being picky, it was still a little bit more pigmented than needed, but you get the general idea. In basic color schemes, an opposite color is always a bold match you can rely on, so using it as a starting point makes life easy. Classic example, red and green. We know it, we love it, they're opposites. Cheers. Red and green are also a fantastic way to dip into how undertones affect colors in general. We mentioned undertones in my skin color video, but colors that aren't skin tones are also just as nuanced as skin tone colors. This is how come we end up with 800 shades of red lipstick, and you can have a living room full of plants and none of them have the same color leaves. You see, color is all light and eyeballs and mixes, so naturally they like to be confusing. But for the everyday person, the thing we want to look for is whether the color we want to use is subtly warm or subtly cool. In the general scheme of things, warm colors range from red to yellow, and cool colors generally range from blue to violet. Green likes to play the field because it has no time for your temperature rules and it's too busy being a chaotic entity to be perceived as a binary. When looking at a color wheel, it is basically a matter of how close to those base warm or base cool colors that your chosen color lands. So with undertones, it's like you zoomed in really hard so you could see the tiny tick marks between the colors and say, "Ah yes, this red has 2 ticks toward blue. It is a blue red and therefore cool toned." Of course, in reality, that's not exactly how it works. The grand majority of us do not carry around one of those color mixing wheels or a Pantone color book, but we can read labels. So if we see a lipstick that's labeled as blue-red, we know that's going to be a cool-toned red lipstick. And that's generally how you categorize an undertone into cool or warm colors. Eventually, when you start paying enough attention to if something looks cool or warm-toned, you don't have to pull out a reference or read a label, you can just kind of guesstimate by looking. Which of course is the goal, because we want things to eventually feel easy and natural and not have to think them through every time, because that is exhausting. Until then though, go ahead and bust out a smartphone, do a quick Google search to compare. I mean, if you have a color wheel, sure, go for it. Though speaking from experience, people do look at you a little weird when you bust out the paint chips or the color wheel or the TI-84 in the middle of Sephora, but that's their business. Regardless, once you've found out if you're using a cool or warm color, you can also use that information to make a color scheme. A color scheme or color palette is a collection of colors. These collections tend to like to stay in their temperature family as it helps create an overall vibe, while mixing warm and cool tones can confuse the vibe. But of course there are exceptions out there for sure, especially if you like going bold. It's just a safer guide to follow when you're starting out. As I also said on my Instagram, ideally a color scheme is between 1 and 5 colors. In art, we like odd numbers for balance, 1, 3, 5, but really any number from 1 to 5 colors works as a color scheme without getting overly busy or muddled. I would suggest getting comfortable with making set palettes with these constraints before you start pushing the limits, because remember, we have to learn the rules to break the rules. Within that, just because you have a set number of colors doesn't mean you need all of those colors in the same amounts. If you have 4 colors, they don't each have to be represented as 25% of the look. You can have 80, 10, 7, and 3%. In fact, I encourage you to play with the amounts of each of your colors. Which color do you want to be the star of the show? What color is there just to make the other colors look balanced? If gold is there as a supporting cast to blue, let it be supporting cast. Don't try and force it into focus and make it compete with blue. You're not going to get the effect you want. By having that variation in amount, you add a lot more depth to your overall color scheme, even if it's just subtle changes. Again, this is yours to play with, so you aren't forced to do this, but if you need a guideline, this is a good path to follow. Speaking of paths, it looks like we are at the end of ours for today, as this is pretty much what you'll need to have in your pocket to start playing around with color. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them below in the comments and I will do my best to answer them. Remember, even though bringing in color can be intimidating, it's not something to shy away from completely. Just keep playing with it. Check out other people's combinations. Rely on mini hacks like opposite colors and varying amounts. You'll do fine. It may take some practice, but eventually you'll be comfortable reaching for colors you want instead of just doggy in the windowing it. I hope this video was helpful in getting you started on your journey with color. As always, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. It means the world to me that you've stopped by today. Until next time, love ya!